My name's John Bineham, or Johny Bineham. Born in Tully, North Queensland, 1st November 1933. Served in a few conflicts. Korea was the first one, Korea, Borneo, and later Vietnam. In Borneo, in Korea, I was a little bit young. I was 18 and you needed your parents' consent if you were under 21 to join up. So I put my age up to 22 and they accepted me with no problems. And they accepted anyone to go to Korea, young, if you're a little bit young or a little bit old, they didn't worry about it. If you joined, and they didn't even require a birth certificate. If you joined the regular army, you had to produce a birth certificate. And I remember there was 22 of us, 23 actually that day. 22 signed up for K-Force to go to Korea, and one was regular army. Out of the 22, actually 3 of us after a year actually went to Korea. So that was Sid Meehan, Bruce Harper and myself, and Sid got killed over there. So yes, I often think about that. I don't know what happened to the other 19, but they disappeared in that year that we had training before we went to Korea. I liked the army. I loved it from the moment that I joined it. It was my personal university. I detested school. I went to Christian Brothers in Brisbane. That's when they had Christian Brothers. I believe they don't have them anymore. But I disliked every minute of it. So my father said, well, if you're not going to go to university and you want to leave the college, you can. But he said you have to take a trade. So I was put in the Tully sugar mill as a fitter and turner. I stayed there a year and I thought, no, this is not for me. I want a life of adventure. So I told my parents I was going to run away, but they didn't take too much notice. But then one day I was away on a surf life saving trip and I did run away. I just went to the station and I said, how much will £5 take me? They said, they'll take you to where? I said, take me to where? So I paid the money and that was it. So I was, I'd actually not run away from my home, but the job, I just wanted adventure. And so I eventually worked my way to Sydney. And then actually in those days, they were recruiting for Korea. And if you went out there, for 2 days, you had meals and what have you. And so I thought it was a chance to, with a couple of friends, to have a couple of decent meals. So we went to the recruiting office, not intending to join. But that night, they took us to Addison Road in Marrickville, and we made our mattresses. They were straw. We put them in a cotton bag, a palliasse, and that was our mattress for the night on stretchers in tents. But they were hot, lovely showers. And the next day I thought, oh, Korea, yeah, it'd be exciting to fight over there. So I'm going to join up. I said, you're crazy. What are you doing? I said, we came here for a meal. You're going to join up? I said, no, I think I'll go and I'll join up. So the sergeant said, once you swear you're in the army, you belong to us. If you're not interested, you can depart now. So I stayed and I joined the army. And my first question was, Sergeant, where's Korea? I had no idea. I had no idea of the politics. I was just an 18-year-old kid, put my age up 4 years to get in the army, but loved it. I loved the training. Now I must say that when I was at Tully, I played football and surf life saving, but I found them boring and everyone got drunk. So I ended up joining the local Rifle Association. And in there, they're all Second World War veterans, all excellent shots. And I was around about 15 when I joined them. And with our 303, so they taught me to be a really good shot, and which stood me in good stead at a later date. Not that I had any idea at that time of ever joining the army. But they're a wonderful bunch of guys. And so I was always orientated, depends what university you go to. I was always oriented towards the army rather than the Navy or the Air Force. So when bringing us back to Addison Road and joining up, I signed up, and so in the army, and I just took to it like a duck to water. And the funny thing was that if you played up or did something wrong, and the instructors, corporal instructors, sergeant instructors weren't happy, they'd say, if you don't pull your socks up, you won't get to Korea. Oh, Sarge, don't do that, because we're all desperate to get to Korea and fight. So there was no one, and everyone was a volunteer. So I had a good friend who joined up that day, Sydney Ian, and because of circumstances, he got to Japan first, and he was married and had a couple of kids. I was footloose and free, 18, and when I got to Japan, he was already there, so he showed me the ropes in Japan, and we trained there for, well, really until that time we went to Korea. So I was desperate to get out and meet the local people, especially the girls, and so I snuck out that night and snuck back in again. And but the next night, when you had to have needles, and so it was 3 or 4 days until you had your needles, and then after that you were allowed to go out on leave. So on the first night out, I met a very attractive Japanese girl, and I stayed there for 2 or 3 days, which the army didn't appreciate. So I had to go before a Major Girk. Now I didn't know. He was the officer commanding the Kure, the army base at the time. But he was actually one of the heroes at Marianne Sang, the battle. Of course, I didn't even know. I had no idea at that time of Marianne Sang, or not a great deal, apart from what our instructors used to tell us, stories. But I had no idea of the history of the Korean War as up to that date. And I was unaware of his role, but he wasn't happy with me staying away for 3 days. So he put me in the jail, army jail, for a couple of weeks, which was fine because everyone else was running around the hills, and I was actually having a rest, and friends were bringing me books and cigarettes. But then, of course, it came time to go to Korea, and they put us on a rusty hulk called the Wosang, which took us across the Hiroshima Straits to Japan, to Korea, and that really shook me, because when I arrived in Busan, I remember they put us on a truck, and I remember standing on the truck, and you could look over the entire city of Busan, and it was all flattened. There was no buildings. They'd literally been flattened. There was cardboard houses put up, people just constructing things. It was a real mess. And so they took us out to Camp Casey, I think it was, for a couple of days, and then they put us on a train up to Kapyong. I think that was as far as the railhead went. And from then they put us again onto a truck and take us to the front. And that really stands in my mind for the simple reason is that when we're on that truck, and as we're getting towards the front, you could hear the artillery, you could hear the sounds of the artillery, and you could hear these huge, they were huge artillery that the Yanks had, and it was like a train. Instead of an artillery shell going, it'd go choo, 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 and there's these huge shells that took a train to load into the weapon. And all these sounds are coming up, and I thought, oh, this is getting serious. And I was getting a bit apprehensive, and I thought, well, hang on. No one asked me to join. I'm here voluntarily. What's your problem? So I thought, oh, well, I'll give it my best shot and do what I can, and sat back down and relaxed and just let it happen. That woke me up to the realities of life, because when we arrived, they said, have you a particular company that you want to join? They asked us, and I said, yes, I want to join my friend Sydney, and he's in Dom Company. I forget the platoon. And I said, no problems. So they took me out there, and they just come out of the line from 355, Little Gibraltar, and I got off the truck, and there was a few others, and they said, I said, look, I'm going to meet up with my friend, my mate, Sydney, and the guy said, oh. So I said, well, what's the problem? And he was killed 3 days before that. So that was not just my best friend, he was really my only friend in the army. So you're there, and I remember it was night time, and so I can remember literally putting my emotions in a bottle. I can tell you, I didn't cry. In fact, I didn't think I could cry. I couldn't cry from that point. That was in 1953, and it was about. I had to see a psychiatrist for some reason or other with the repatriation, and that was in about 1980, and we went over different things, and the gates opened. Just teared literally for I don't know, more than half an hour. I know he ran out of a box of tissues. So I couldn't stop, and I can cry as good as anyone now. But for 40 years I didn't, and that was from that moment. And well, you have to. I think everyone has to shut their emotions down a little bit. You can't go around. I mean, in the movies you see someone killed and they're just cuddling your best friend, and I never saw that. You're dead. You're dead. Everyone just went about their business. And in Vietnam or Korea. But then, the funny thing was, we were out of line and we had to do, they call them a skunk hunt. And there was a 10-mile demarcation, and there was no civilians, and anybody in that area was the enemy, apart from the UN troops. And there were spies, North Korean, Chinese, going backwards and forwards. And so our job was then to spread out in an extended line, everyone about 15 metres away from each other, and just literally walk over hill and dale, and if you met anybody, engage with them and shoot them, or they shoot you, whatever. So it was a beautiful day, I remember, and I had just arrived, and I was a Bren gunner, so I carried a Bren gun. Everyone else had submachine guns, submachine guns. I had a couple of grenades, and I think I was the only one carrying them, but I just arrived, so I was ready for anything. And the others, they were veterans, so they just carried the minimum, which was a couple of magazines and an Owen gun. And anyway, we came to this little ex-Korean village, or it's a couple of huts, and they had these beautiful mulberry trees, I can remember. And so we got our slouch hats, and we filled the slouch hats with mulberries. And we went to the top of a hill, and there we're eating our mulberries. And suddenly there's this activity down below, and here's this guy, and he's running, and well, they had to have a sack and weapons, I presume, and then that was it, and so he didn't. So anyway, the long and short was, because I had the Bren gun, I killed him, and so we're walking down towards him, and I just wanted to apologise for, sorry mate, strictly business, and then on our right, suddenly there was this other group of line crossers, whether they were Chinese or North Korean, I got no idea. So they started shooting at us, and we returned fire. So they took off, and we took off behind them. So they were running and shooting, and we're shooting and running, all missing each other, until we ran around the small hill, and they ran into a cave. And so there was the three of us, and by that time one or two others had joined us because of the shooting, so they all ran towards the shooting. And so all standing outside saying, you go in. I said, no, you go in. And no one was prepared to go in the cave. So the thing was, I was the only one with any grenades, so I gave a grenade, Mills bomb, 36 Mills bomb to some guy, and I had pulled out the pin and I rolled it into the cave, and then the other guy rolled his grenade into the cave, and boom, boom, and so that was it. So so I had possibly 3 dead, my friend and my best friend dead, all within space of probably 4 days. So that shook me up a little bit. And so then it was normal patrolling back in the line. We went to Area 159. And yeah, so that was my introduction to the Korean War. And then after that it was patrolling, and on the patrols I went to, we never encountered them because, you know, people can go on patrol after patrol and then nothing happens, and when it does happen, and it's all over sometimes in 5 minutes, but all hell breaks loose. But then there was, in the intelligence section, there was someone who was, for whatever reason, they were wounded or something, they had to be taken away, so they were looking for a local replacement. So because I could sketch, and I remember Brad just saying, did you do any sketches in the army? And I must have, because they said, oh, you can sketch, draw Bineham, so they sent me off to the intelligence section. So there'd been a few others. They had him for a few weeks, and they kept me. So then it was into a world working with headquarter company and the command post of CP, because we had to do all their maps and everything to do with air photographs, all this stuff. So we were in the thick of what was actually happening. So it gave us a very good insight into, rather than just one's own little platoon and that very insular outlook, suddenly you were there, thrust in amongst everything that was going on, and the communications coming from the patrols that went out. I'll give you one instance, which was it was 2 patrols went out. One was from A companies, and they have an area of operations, an AO, and you're supposed to stick to that area. And then there was another one, possibly from B company. But anyway, there was another patrol. But one patrol went off course, and they ended up going across a feature, which I got involved with later on, called the Mound. And the enemy, the Chinese, were always there when we went to greet us when we went across the Mound. But on this occasion, they were going over the top of the mound, and they were silhouetted. But the people from the other patrol, fighting patrol, they were actually laying down in wait. And suddenly there's these people going across the top silhouetted, and they actually saw some of them with Owen guns and Bren guns, but the enemy used captured weapons, so they opened fire. But I could hear that in the command post. And suddenly they said, oh, what a coincidence. Both patrols are engaging the enemy at the same time, both calling out bandits, bandits. Then we could hear them swearing, and we realised, of course, they were engaging each other. So it only lasted a couple of minutes, but there was only about 3 people out of that wasn't dead or wounded. It was really quite horrific. And the results, and Henry J.L. MacDonald, and I can remember him when he heard the casualties, he just said, I remember he rolled his thumbs and he said, seems our firepower is more effective than we thought, because we, from the results of that action. So this was it was a very interesting area to be, because it gave you an insight into everything that was going on in the battalion. Well, you could be on a reconnaissance patrol, which was only a few people, just really finding out the lay of the land. You could also be on a listening outpost where there's only 2 of you placed out, and in some places just listening for the enemy. Or you could be a fighting patrol, which could be from 12 to 15, 16 men. And they were all armed. Usually had mainly, at that time we had no rifle. We didn't carry rifles. Well, in Don Company, some of the other companies might have had 1 rifleman with them carrying a rifle, but it was nearly all Bren guns and Owen machine guns, because it's close engagement. And you often go out or an ambush patrol, and where you just where you need to go to a specific location, and you just lay up and wait for the enemy. And so you had a bandana, just a sweat rag, and that was usually filled with mosquito repellent that you could put around your head, because you're staying silent, so you didn't want to be bothered. The mosquitoes gave you a hard time. And then you literally wait. Now, a fighting patrol literally went out to fight. They were looking for a fighting, for an action. But we had, he was Jock Mathers, Lieutenant Jock, he's dead now, and Jock, and he was a bit of a wild lad, and at that time. But he just literally said, he didn't order anyone. He just said, who's coming out of patrol tonight? And people just automatically volunteered. And so there was no hassles, anything like that. And so the normal procedure was to just test fire your weapons, put it into the ground at a certain location, have a nervous pee, and away you went. And then you had to go down the forward slope, and there were minefields on either side, and you had to go through the mine gap. And once you're through that mine gap, you had a specific area that you had to go, because there were other patrols from other companies going out. So it was, well, really, it was, there's a tension, but it's boring. I mean, the only thing that's really happening is the parachute flares going overhead, and you hear a pop, and they just might be one or two or three, and they just literally floating down, and then some more flares would go up, and you literally wait. Now, I have to say that on the patrols I went to, I didn't engage the enemy. I had other situations, but they weren't in it, where I was involved, but they weren't in a patrol action, and but there's tension, you know. I think, and this is a problem, because going on the others who actually did have an engagement, an action, it was like a huge release of tension, and you felt fine once things happened, but it's that tension all the time. And then, of course, if there was an action, both the Chinese and the Australians, we knew their mine gaps and how they had to get back up to return to their positions, but they knew ours. So they just literally had machine guns and mortars and what have you in that general area, and often there was a lot of casualties that on the return journey for both parties. So it wasn't just the action; it was just trying to get back. So that was a pretty desperate, because it was literally up the slope and back into your own lines. Yeah, so I because I was with the intelligence section, I had. Well, I'll give you one instance. Lofty Hayes, who was with the visual intelligence, and he came out unannounced, and he just said, "Look, I've got a couple of North Korean spies, line crossers, and we've got to go across the Shamashon River, and I need someone." But he said, "They're not good swimmers, so I want someone who's a good swimmer and who also knows the area, the hills, and so we're working with that all the time, because if that person was separated and he gets lost, he knows how to get back to his own lines and so forth." So the intelligence officer said, "Well, what about you, John?" I said, "Yeah, I'm fine." So that was it. He said, "Okay, I'll be around in about a week or so," and didn't give the date. And he arrived. Anyway, that night, it was the rainy season, the Shamashon was in flood, and because we had to get a rope across one of my jobs was to swim across the Shamashon, both of us, or him, or whatever. We had to get a rope across the flooded Shamashon River. So then the Koreans, the line crossers, could get across. Then they were to hide up while we checked that the coast was clear. And once the area was clear, then we'd take them up there, then on their own, and then we'd come back. We found out later that there was the Gloucester Colonel, Lieutenant Colonel Khan, he won a VC, and they're going to get him to escape from the North Korean prison. And these two line crossers, which I found out later from a book, like 20 years later, that they were then to get Khan and take him back to where we took him across the Shamashon and get him across the Shamashon and meet up. And so that was the plan. But I knew nothing about that. But anyway, he arrived, and it was rainy season, but it was a beautiful moonlight night. And so we waited till about 2:30 or 3 o'clock in the morning. So we can't go. We don't have enough time to get a rope across the river, the flooded river, and so forth. So I said, "Okay, well, I'll come back another occasion." He came back a week later, but my job then was to go up to I wasn't there because I had to go to the company, and one of my jobs was when we went to an area, because we're making our own maps, we had to check that the mine gaps and everything on that map was correct. Because on a map, it could be a small amount, but on the ground, it means a lot to the person on patrol. So my job then, with a couple of snipers, was to go within the forward slope, out of our trenches and literally wait there until there was sufficient light that I could take compass bearings on the various features, and the snipers said, okay, that's enough. It's getting a bit light now. We've got to get back into our lines before the enemy starts shooting at us, because that did happen to a friend of mine, Ray Bernard, who had a brilliant career in the army, ended up brigadier, and later in Vietnam and what have you. But he was doing exactly the same job, but he was shot by one of his own men in the chest, and he survived. And the Chinese realised it was a mistake, and so they allowed a stretcher party to come over our side and take him back and saved his life. And so yeah, that was pretty scary, pretty hairy things to be in the forward slope. You've got the enemy opposite there, and you know, they've got snipers, we've got snipers, and so you've got to, it's judging it. So when our sniper said it's time to get back in, you went. But this night, I was sitting on there, and we were waiting, and it was 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock in the morning, 3:30, what, I don't know. And there's the two snipers and myself, and just sitting there, and I could hear down in the valley, and I could, oh wow, you know, I could hear the burp guns going, and I thought, oh, they're having a party down there, over on the right, towards the Samachon. What I didn't know was, he'd come for me that night, and to go to take the line crosses, but I couldn't come. So he got his, he took his Korean Sergeant Kim, who was a good friend of his. Lofty Hayes was the guy, and they got across the Samachon, and then they hid the two line crosses, the two spies, South Korean spies who were heading north, you know, pretty brave guys. And they, so Lofty and Sergeant Kim went up, but they were ambushed by the Chinese, and then they opened fire. Kim was shot through the head straight away. That was, he's doing my job, and Lofty got hit in the hand. So Lofty Hayes, yeah, they had the burp guns, the Russian guns, so he put an automatic and he threw it over there and hit the ground. And so they started shooting over there. Meanwhile, he ran over here and managed to get to the Samachon. By that time, they were chasing him. He jumped into the Samachon River, and it flowed back, took him back to our lines. So I missed that party. So I had little jobs. These are the type of jobs that I was involved in more than patrol action. So there was, you don't know what's going to come up, but they were just at any one time, you know. So that was midsummer actually. This is getting towards. Well, that was our last area, the Hook area, and it was dry, and but no one looked over the forward slopes, because if you did, you'd be shot at. So, but we knew from air photographs. And it was the Samachon Valley was quite a wide valley, and the Hook had a really good. It overlooked the entire valley, so it was really a tactical position and sought after. But it was the grass was. I mean, it would crackle under your feet. It was so dry, and very, very hot, and which meant, because when anyone was killed, either us or them, and they were left in the valley, and because you literally often couldn't get them back, and sometimes you didn't even know where they were. So the place stunk. It was really, and it depends which way the winds blew, you know, and so certainly in the Hook area you had the smell of death day and night, depending on the winds. They weren't tall features. They weren't big, tall mountains like 121 metres, 110 metres, but they were very close to the enemy, and there was only something like about 150 yards between our closest feature and theirs. They were very, very close. And the thing is that became a very important area, because at that time they're having the talks at Panmunjom, and if the Chinese had got through the Hook area, well, the Samachon was over here, they could have cut off the Australians, and they'd already knocked back the Americans a couple of times, and the Marines, and they got back up. So it was very, very strategic. But it was. I can remember actually the smell, when the war finished, there were people came up from the rear. they didn't last very long because the smell was really, really bad. I mean, you can never get entirely used to it, but you do get used to it. But people coming up from the rear, they just had a look at the area that we're talking about. And of course, it was littered with bodies in, and the smell was really bad. So they didn't last very long, and they just up there for half an hour, 5 minutes, take a few photographs, and they were gone. So the smell was a big thing I can remember about that valley, and everything was brown and grey. I remember I could not get over. When I returned to Korea, it was like my impressions of Korea was dark brown, greys, dark greens, no trees, shrubs, because all trees were either blown up. We couldn't, in winter, we couldn't use wood. We had to use petrol for shufas to keep warm. There was no wood, literally. When I returned to Korea 15 years ago, it was like going into a garden. I can remember on the bus, I looked at the mountains, and the mountains are green, all these beautiful trees, the gardens. It was, you talk about miracles, because it was like, you see things just brown, 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 it's like the floor. Suddenly you go back and everything's trees, and where they couldn't put trees, they got flowers. So like South Korea is going, like returning to a garden state. So that was a remarkable thing to me. That was from one impression to the other. So I was in headquarter company, so we were smack in the middle of 3 Battalion, but I suppose they were just a couple of blocks away, really, as close as that, but their long finger. This is where the Chinese attacked mainly. That was further over to the left, but that was right on the western flank, near the Marines, and the Marines had been pushed back a few times, and then they recaptured. But just that Hook battle, people think of the Hook battle, but there was about 5 battles for the Hook. The Marines had been there; they'd been knocked back a couple of times, and they recaptured it. And then there was the Duke of Wellingtons, the Middlesex. So Duke of Wellington, I think, was there twice, and actually, I just to diversify, when we took over from the Duke of Wellingtons, and they'd been, I think there's a book called The Dead, the Dying and the Damned, and it was about the attack on the Hook that they had, and I went over there because I had to go there to their intelligence section and collect the maps and all the things that we needed from them, from one intelligence section to the other. So I had to secure that. So I was, with my driver, I was probably the first into the Duke of Wellingtons before any other Australians went there, and it was just everything was just flattened. All the bunkers and they were all flattened. It was a real mess, and I can remember that. And it was early in the morning, and they had breakfast and a cup of tea, but they really went through hell. And they had an overall attack. Ours was mainly up this long finger. That was the primary, which was right next to between 121 and Hill 121 and Hill 11, and the Marines, one Marines on the western. So that's a long way around of saying the barrage. And by the way, that was huge barrages, because there was not just, there was the New Zealanders who traditionally supported us, but they also had the 1st Commonwealth Division Brigade artillery. They had the Turkish Brigade artillery. They had Centurion tanks. So when they all opened up together, it was, I mean, even though we're a block or 2 away, it was really, you knew it. They were whistling everywhere. We had a little bit of stuff, but not much. But they thought 3 Battalion would be the main battalion to be attacked, and we were actually reinforced by the Middlesex Regiment. But it wasn't. They hit 2 Battalion because they were trying to create a wedge between the Marines and 2 Battalion, the Australians, and if they could do that, they could literally cut us off, and the San Juan River was here, and if they could get the Hook area, that gave them, at the negotiation tables in Panmunjom, that gave them a very strategic, position for the North Koreans to have. So this is the reason why they put such an emphasis on that last battle. But what happened was that one of the things was that I bought a really good camera, the first Nikon 1.4, and so and when the day after on the 27th of July, my job was to go over to the Hook area and then go beyond the Chinese positions and photograph, go in there and photograph from their side if they had any tunnels. And I found 2 on the mound, and I photographed them. I've got a photograph here. And then but there were bodies everywhere, and with this barrage, the New Zealanders, they used what they call VT fuses, and so they could get them to explode 100 metres in the air instead of landing on the ground. So the explosion came down, but people don't realise there were. I can remember walking, and there was bodies here and there, but there were lumps. What's going on? And literally, they had no head, no arms, and no legs. The force of the explosion coming down literally ripped off the limbs, and sometimes the outer body. And there were just lumps lying all over the place. So there was something like 2,000 enemy dead. I think we lost about 58. But that was it was primarily an artillery barrage and these VT fuses that did the damage, as they come up. One interesting story, my friend Jim Callahan, he was a sniper with 2 Battalion, and we met. I want to diversify just for a second, because when we were training in Japan, they had the Australians had the best 4 shots, the English had their best 4 shots, Canadians, New Zealanders, and what have you. So it was a British Commonwealth thing. It was a battle school at Haramura. And what happened, they had a competition, and it was putting in the shilling, and so my friend Jim was telling the story, and he said, we had, next to us was this, the English, and they had a sub-lieutenant, and he said, come on lads, shoot for king and shoot for country. And because it was still king, the Queen was the following year, or later that year. And he said, I said, I remember that. And he said, we had a corporal, an ex-cane cutter from Queensland. He said, stuff the king and stuff the country. He said, shoot for the money. And we did. And so we won the competition. So anyway, this Jim from there, so that's this rifle going right back to. So he used to go out shooting rabbits, and he was a really good shot. So he became a sniper with 2 Battalion. He went over with 2 Battalion. But he said to me, there was him and another sniper, and they had these sniper scopes, which they could, the darker the night, the blacker the night, the further they could see. And some officer came up and said, what we want you to do is count how many of the enemy are attacking. So we've got an idea how many are attacking us. Okay. So when they went, Jim said, you're going to count them? The other guy said, no. I said, I'm just going to kill as many as I can. I'm not going to worry about counting them. So later, the officer came back, and the guy said, how many were coming up? The guy said, about 25,000. He just picked a number out of the air. So I think 25,000 possibly gone into the official records. I don't know, but anyway. So that was that guy. But Jim told me, he said, the thing that he remembers, he said they were just coming up, he said, like rabbits. But he said there was one guy, and he said, I could never work it out what it was, this enemy, Chinese, and he said he was running, and he said he's like carrying a baby. And he was running, carrying this baby, and then he pitched forward and obviously died. And he said, I've never worked that out. I said, well, I can tell you what it is now. And I said, did he go through a big cloud of white? He said, yeah, of course. And he did. I said, well, he got hit with a phosphorus artillery shell. And what was happening, all his flesh was burning and falling off his flesh, and he was holding while his flesh was falling into his arms, and that's when he died. So this is phosphorus. This is a really nasty, nasty thing. I've got a photograph. I took one guy. He was in the trenches in the Hook, and he was hit with a phosphorus grenade. It looked like a tin of canned baked beans. It was lying alongside him, and hit him in the face, and there's only his teeth. Everything else is literally burnt away. It just burns you. And of course, the only thing you can do is put it under water, and there's no water on the battlefield. So it's a very, very nasty way to die. That was really bad. And so we're literally in 3 battalion and sitting there waiting, but it was really a 2 battalion show on that occasion. We knew it was days. We knew it was imminent. That's the one thing that I've got to say about the Australian soldiers or the Australian Army at that time, and again Borneo when I was there, and again in Vietnam, that the diggers were told if they had to do something, attack a situation, or they were told what it was for, why they were doing it. They were given as much information as they possibly could. So you weren't just told, you knew exactly what you're doing it, and you knew why you were doing it. And this makes a very big difference to someone who's just told to do this or told to do that and given orders. So they treated you with that you weren't stupid, that they treated you that you knew what was going on, and that they gave you this, all the information that they had basically, and it was given to you. So you knew what you were doing. And I think this is lacking in most armies. They're basically taught to just obey orders. Well, no, we're not. I remember when I joined up, and the guy said, the corporal said, we're here to break your back, not to break your spirit. So they want to enhance your personality. They want you to develop. If over and over again, when Australians don't have their officer or commanding officer, whatever it is, whatever it happens to be, and they're left on their own, they can work as individuals, and that happens over and over again. From the First World War onwards, I think to be a successful soldier, you have to be a fatalist. In other words, you're going to get killed, you're going to get killed. You're not going to get killed, you're not going to get killed. I think every man would, even look, it's a job. You do the job to the best of your capacity. It just happens to be that, and if it meant, because if you went to an American position, you had these pillboxes, these things standing up, and they had barbed wire, not barbed wire, they had wire netting in the front, and so no grenades could come in, but you couldn't throw a grenade out. And of course, but the Australian Army never wanted their people to get what they called tunnel fever. So we had slit trenches, and they were open, so they were all open, and if there was a barrage, you literally kept your head down, as you were saying, or what happened. But the moment there was an attack, you could stand up, and there was your weapons and everything was there for you, and you were out in the open. So you were there, you were fighting always out in the open. You weren't put in a bunker and things like that, which the Americans tended to do. Not always, but it depends. But I can remember going and seeing these bunkers, and oh my God. Just a quick one. So I just think people went about their business, and knowing the truth, no, I don't think, I just think people just did their job. You just, that's it. But one thing that did happen, it's amusing and sad. Our driver, the intelligence section, his name was Charlie Mitchell, a real larrikin, a scallywag. Anyway, a lot of the officers didn't. They had a because Australian units, if we're out of the line, we got a beer, a bottle of beer, or a couple, didn't matter, a couple of bottles a day if you're out of the line. And in the officers' mess, they also had a whiskey allocation. Of course, not everyone drank. Most of the guys did, but some of the officers, they didn't drink their whiskey allocation. So Charlie Mitchell had this connection. He got all this officer's whiskey, and he said, "Come on, John, we're going over to the Yanks, to the Marines. We're going to sell the whiskey." I said, "Okay." So we got in, and so this is the advantage of being in the intelligence section. You know, you just went wherever you want, but no one questioned it because you were in the intelligence section. So it had its advantages. Anyway, we went over to this area, and there was a company of Marines, and what we did was, well, Charlie did, he went to the officer commanding, and he went up and he said, "Here's a bottle of whiskey, but we want to sell our grog, our whiskey, to the Americans. They were Marines." And he said, yeah. So he had his bottle of whiskey. So I went out, and I can remember one Marine said, it's a slouch hat. He said, the Australian hat. He said, "I was in the Second World War, and I got one of your slouch hats, and I took it home." He said, "And I got it painted gold, and I got it up on my mantelpiece." So I can remember this guy saying that. But anyway, we sold all our whiskey. I can't remember what it was and how much we got for it. But what happened then, and this was in the morning, this was around about 9 o'clock, and then they all formed up to go across this paddy field and attack, I think it was East or West Berlin. They were features there, and I think that, or Betty Grable, it was one of these, the Chinese features. But I thought, well, why you attack it at this time? You go first light when they can't see you. Why would you cross the valley in broad daylight? So they must have had poor intelligence. But they went about 300 or 400 metres, and suddenly mainly mortars came over, but machine guns, and it pinned them all down. Now some got killed, and they were lying there, but no one ran. I watched. So we got our vehicle. We took it further back out of the range of any mortars, but they were just pinned down. But no. But the thing was, I thought, well, hang on, they're really copying it. But no one ran. They all, well, some were obviously killed, but others just stayed there. So I was quite impressed with that fact. So we left them to their job, and we returned. So I can remember that very vividly. Yeah. Again, because of the intelligence section, we needed supplies, maps. At that time, the maps were, I've got to say, they were very good. They were produced by the Japanese long before we got there. So they actually mapped the entire area of Korea. So we used those maps, which are in Korean, of course. So we're always having problems with stuff like that. China graph pencils, talc, this is where you overlay, plastic overlays you put over that, and a whole range of things. So we used to go down to the Americans, but we used to take butter, because the Americans had all margarine, whereas we had all butter. So what we used to do was, we'd go down and the butter would go to the officers' mess, the American officers' mess. But we could get anything we wanted with butter. It was like gold. So we used to trade that. And occasionally we'd take a little bit, some other things as well, and trade them to the black market. But I can remember going down there once, and we went to the American PX, and that was like a big superstore in Seoul. And I can remember, as we walked in there, it had up, "Please check in your weapons." So as you went in, there's hundreds of rifles, pistols, machine guns, all checked in with a good name, because rather than checking in your coat, you're checking in your weapons. And otherwise you wouldn't let you wander around the store with a weapon. So I can remember that, yeah, "Please check on your weapons," as if you're in the Wild West. So I always had I carried a Bren. I liked the Bren. I was a Bren gunner. And so I'd be checking the Bren gun. But you could buy anything, including food, so that was a welcome break. And so, but really, I think that's, we didn't really mix. You know, you're doing a job. We didn't mix with the British. We didn't mix with the Americans. We didn't mix with the Koreans. We didn't, not that we didn't want to mix with them. We just, you don't have the time. You're doing your job. But what we did have, we had, when I arrived in the in section, we had a Kim, a young, probably a 12-year-old, 14, 13-year-old Korean kid, and he just literally looked after us, cups of teas, whatever, run errands and what have you. And then we had a Captain Sung, and he was in charge of they call them catcoms, and they were they had Koreans that were working with the Australians, and they were a couple to a section. Again, there was a language problem, so often they rarely went on patrol, because if something happened, you had the language situation, and of course it was no good for either party. So they were normally left back in your positions as in the defensive situation. But I got to know Captain Sung a little bit, and he spoke quite good English, and but he was a pretty tough man. He certainly, the people he commanded, they really treated him with respect, and so we really didn't. The only time we really mixed with anybody was when we went on leave, because you're in Japan, and you are mixing with people. But in Korea, and I would say even the average digger in Vietnam, they didn't meet any Vietnamese. They would have met. I did, because I was with the intelligence corps there, and I had a different job, so I was with them all the time. But in Korea, yeah, that was a sad thing, and so we had Koreans there, but it was we had none in the intelligence section, and so yeah, that was a bit of a pity. Culturally, I tell you, from my perspective, when they very shortly after the armistice, I mean within weeks, we had a new Sergeant Major, battalion Sergeant Major, and he wasn't in the war, so he was he had no empathy at all for the people who fought in the war, and all he was just into military parade grounds and all the different stuff, and it was, I just was really sorry the war was finished, quite frankly, because you knew what you were doing, you had a purpose, everyone had a specific job, you did the job as best you could, but apart from that, you were free, you know, there was no one telling you, checking whether you're shaved or checking your weapons, or it was your profession. But when the war finished, and of course from the battalion commander, they're out to keep the men busy, so we were on lots of exercises. But they were totally different. They were exercises by the book, whereas during the war, you did, depending on the situation, you did this or you did that. So yeah, it was. I didn't like it at all. I've never really liked the army in peacetime. That's why when I left Korea, I got out of the army. Then I went back in the commandos. I was with one commando company, and I was the first put in for an officer, and I was 3 months too old. So I said bye-bye to the commandos, and then I rejoined later, in '65, and went to Borneo. But the reason why I rejoined was because there was the war in Malaya, and there was the war in Vietnam. So I joined really because I liked the war aspect. I've never really liked the army, just being for the army, for the parade ground stuff and all that type of stuff. There's no purpose. You're not working towards an end. Whereas in the war, so that was really, yeah, it was. I didn't. It was a harder time for me personally. I liked the cut and thrust of the war, you know, and actually I just wanted to be in the army, and I wrote to the French consulate to join the Foreign Legion because they were fighting in Vietnam, and I wanted to join the Legion to fight in Vietnam. But when I got discharged in April '54, Dien Bien Phu had already fallen. So I didn't want to go to Africa in the desert, so I didn't end up joining the Legion. But I'd applied for it over there because I liked the army. I enjoyed it. There's downsides, but there's lots of you get experiences. Yeah, I'm sure. Yeah, you can. It opens up the possibilities and the experiences that an ordinary person is just not available to that person, and things that happened. I mean, going to Japan, they put us in a Globemaster. The Globemasters were dropping out of the sky over the Tsushima Straits about 4 weeks. And the one we got in to at Seoul, it took off and it crash landed. We got out because it didn't, because it was full of petrol. We were gone up, so we had to walk about. It took us about 4 hours to walk back to Kimpo airfield, and so I was with Joe Joyce, and we. He was there. He stayed in the army, and we were just alongside each other, and we were going up. And you're talking about artillery barrages, and someone said, "War. If it wasn't for people being killed, war is really a beautiful experience." And we used to go to this hill, and we had these big Japanese binoculars, and we used to go up there every so often and just literally see what was happening on the front line. And you could see, for instance, sabres come in, or they drop a bomb. They drop what they call a deep penetration bomb. Now that was something, because that deep penetration bomb, you'd see the bomb hit soil, and there'd be a bit of dust go up, and then you could go 1,001, 1,002, 1,003, and then the whole place would lift up like an earthquake, and that's to collapse the tunnels underneath. I wouldn't have liked to be the person under that. Anyway, and then there'd be the shelling and this and that going on. And we usually got there, days done at more or less dusk. So on this occasion, we're there. I don't know who had the binoculars, the one pair, but we're just literally beside each other, and suddenly, boom, and back literally 1 or 2 feet from us was this big mortar, 300 mil mortar, big Chinese one. It didn't go off, but we could see the fins sticking out of the soil about that much. And there wouldn't have been anything left of us, because that was the big mortar. So, that's what I'm saying. You become fatalistic. You just weren't meant to go on that occasion, and that's what it is. There was no hard feelings, and if you had gone, there's no hard feelings towards the enemy or anybody else. It's strictly business, and that was it. So there's all these odd occasions and things like that. You read the book, and you read about going to the toilet. Now there's a funny thing. Now, I mean, I'm on the toilet, it's 2 o'clock in the morning, and it's just over the brow of a hill, and there's nothing there, just a little thing, and I'm finished, and I think, I didn't bring any paper, and how stupid, and no one left any paper, and not there's newspapers, but you've got an issue of paper, toilet paper, and I'm thinking how stupid I am and so forth, and there's this, again, a barrage coming from us, going over to the enemy. So that's while I'm sitting on the throne, and suddenly there's this almighty explosion, and of course everyone automatically folds up into the fetal position, and then you feel yourself, yeah, that's there, because sometimes an arm's missing, and you say, hey mate, you're missing an arm, because you don't know. The force of it just takes it off. So anyway, and then there's suddenly this falling, and there's all these pieces of paper about this size. There are all these propaganda leaflets being sent to the enemy to surrender, and we look after you and so forth. I mean, thousands and thousands of them. So I went up the next day, it's like snow, like confetti everywhere. So there was all this paper, so I thought, whoever's up there, because I wasn't religious, he's got a sense of humour, or he or she has got a sense of humour, because it just came down at that time. Another fun thing that happened, and it just talks about fate. Christmas time, it was Christmas over there, and it hadn't snowed for ages. But at Christmas the officers served the men, and we were in a concert hut. The war had finished, and suddenly we're there and looked outside, and the snow came down while we had lunch for an hour. Then it didn't snow again for weeks. So there's all these little crazy things, nearly mystic, really. It's not exactly spiritual, but you think, hang on, that's amazing to snow, or things like that happen. So you have this feeling you're being looked after. I always had a feeling I was being looked after. So anyway, I'm here. So well, all wars are rackets. Churchill said we after the First World War, he said we killed the wrong people. He said, meaning we should have killed the bankers instead of the German soldiers. The highest-ranking American, 2 congressional medals of honor, and he wrote a book, "Wars Are a Racket." And what he meant was, so many wars that at the end of a war, lots of people become millionaires. Next war, those millionaires become billionaires. And there's these people at the top pulling the strings and so forth, politicians and generals, and often the ordinary person, the civilian, the ordinary soldiers on either side have got very little say in it. But the one thing that really sustains me, certainly about the Korean War, is when I returned, to see South Korea and a bit emotional, to see South Korea and see the change. It's a highly successful country. Because so many things that happened in the Korean War that was really nasty. Napalm that was poured more on North Korea than on the troops. There was 3,280 tons of napalm was on cities, towns, and villages in North Korea, not on soldiers. The last few months of the war, there was Old Baldy, Heartbreak Ridge. They were of no tactical. The Australians wouldn't have attacked it, or the British. They were of no tactical importance, and yet thousands of South Koreans, there were Turks, there were French, there was Americans, as well as Chinese, died for no reason, because generals, they just decided they had no tactical importance. And that makes you angry, because it's unnecessary. But the thing about the Korean War is, you look at South Korea and you think, this is really positive, and it just wouldn't have existed. And so that sustains me. And the other thing about it, in South Korea would have been a perfect situation, where South Vietnam, if they'd done basically the same as in South Korea. They could have just taken the area around Saigon, the area of South Korea, and they had with their battleships and this and that, they could have made South Vietnam another South Korea. And South Vietnam could have been a highly prosperous democratic country, the same as South Korea, which didn't happen. Everyone just left, and that's it. So if you compare, say, those two wars, and the other thing was that for both wars, the Americans and the Australians lost about the same, but the Korean War was 3 years. 3 to 4 million people died in that. So you didn't have those losses in the Vietnam. You had other terrible things happen there. But the thing is that you've got that South Korea. You've got this, and it's really a beacon of democracy, and they have their political problems from time to time. But we walked away from Vietnam with nothing. just a tail between our legs. You know, certainly the Americans, in our province, everything was fine. So that's the one thing that, you know, the people who went to Korea, you know, whether they're Americans, the other 22 different nations, that's one thing they can be really proud of. And which we can't say the same for other wars. You know, there was some really there was a lot of good came out of it in that respect. And they say it's a forgotten war. It's not forgotten to the Koreans. I mean, they haven't forgotten it. But it was so. But Vietnam was so soon after the Korean War that it literally got caught up in all the media things with Vietnam, and so to most of the Western countries, Korea became the forgotten war. But certainly not to the Koreans.